This is episode number 265 with the incredible artist, Joseph McGurl.
This is the Plein Air Podcast with Eric Rhoads, publisher and founder of Plein Air Magazine. In the Plein Air Podcast, we cover the world of outdoor painting. Called Plein Air, the French coined the term, which means open air or outdoors. The French pronounce it plein air. Others say plein air. No matter how you say it, there is a huge movement of artists around the world who are going outdoors to paint. And this show is about that movement. Now, here's your host, author, publisher, and painter, Eric Rhoads.
Thank you, Jim Kipping, and welcome everybody to the Plein Air Podcast. I'm Eric. Hey, glad you're here. Pretty excited about today's podcast with Joe McGurl. He is such a wonderful human being and such a brilliant artist. I had the pleasure, there was a period of time when I really needed some big time help. And so I worked with Joe for a solid week one time, and it was just like the best thing ever. And it changed my artwork forever. So I think you're going to be completely blown away by what he has to say today. I can't believe Christmas is right around the corner. It's just like the new year is here and poof, it's Christmas again. And I still have a little bit of Christmas shopping to do. And I was supposed to go Christmas shopping last weekend, but instead I went painting. So I'm a little behind. And so, you know, what's really been wonderful is I've got a couple of friends who just moved here. They're both excellent painters. And so we've been able to get out and go painting a little bit more than normal. So it's like, yay. So maybe my family are going to be getting some plein air studies for Christmas because there may be nothing else. Hey, I'm grateful to you guys for checking out this show and spreading the word. We're having a lot of people who are passing it around and telling others about it and leaving positive reviews and comments. We really appreciate that. It helps, every bit helps. We also just learned that about a month and a half ago, that my daily YouTube art school live show has hit almost 17 million views. That's incredible. We've had a couple million with the Plein Air Podcast. So we're pretty pleased about that. We're hitting 90, 100 countries. And that means plein air painting. There's interest in it around the world. And I think that's really cool. So thank you for doing that. At the end of the podcast, I'm going to do a little bit of art marketing. And I should tell you that I'm also doing art marketing Mondays now on my YouTube show on Art School Live. So on Mondays, I'm doing a little bit of teaching about art marketing. On Fridays, I'm doing critiques. And in between, we still have demos from different artists from around the world. And so that's always cool. Also should let you know that I'm going to be doing a big event. It's called Art Business Mastery Day. And it's coming up right around the 10th, on the 10th of January. We have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people already signed up. The whole idea is to help you have a really successful 2025. We're going to show you how to set your goals, how to plan. We're going to teach you all these methods about marketing yourself at a different level, marketing on social media, how to get publicity, how to get into art galleries. We have guest art galleries that are going to be on. We have a lot of guests. And so it's going to be a terrific day. And I wanted to make it cheap, right? I need to cover my expenses. I wanted to make it cheap so you guys have something you can rely on to get you what you want to help you live your dreams in 2025. And it's called Art Marketing Mastery Day. Actually, Art Business Mastery Day. I got that wrong. So you can learn more about it by going to Streamline Art Events. That's my company, StreamlineArtEvents.com /marketing. Okay, so check that out. If you guys have ideas or you want to give feedback or you want to add marketing questions, just drop me a note, Eric at pleinairmagazine.com. Okay, a couple other things before we get to Joe. We have a terrific ebook for you. If you're new to plein air painting or you're looking for ideas, you want to get better, we've put together a book of 201 plein air tips, and they're good tips, and you can get it for free at pleinairmagazine.com/ebook. All right. We are super excited about Lake Tahoe. Ooh, baby. I was just out in Lake Tahoe, and I've been out there 2 times now to get ready for the big plein air convention in Lake Tahoe and Reno. We're staying in Reno. We're painting in the Reno area. We're painting in the Tahoe area. We're going to be painting up in Virginia City. I'm bringing my cowboy hat and boots, and we're going to have a great time. The Plein Air Convention, if you've not been, is a giant convention, right? We do training on 5 different stages. We've got an oil stage, watercolor stage, pastel stage, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we have some of the best artists in the world, including Joseph McGurl. We also have the great Scott Christensen is coming in and doing a pre-convention workshop, which is very rare. And we have the great Joseph Zbukvich, who is the one of the top, if not the top, watercolor artists in the world. And he's coming in from Australia to teach a pre-convention workshop. Plus, they'll both be on stage. So you want to come in early. If you're new to plein air painting, we have a plein air basics course, which is the day the event begins. They all are, but you get most of the day working on your art. We have a lot of people teaching all the things about equipment and gear and how to use it and how to do paintings and you name it. So that's at the Plein Air Convention. There's only 200 seats left. And, with Christmas coming, who knows? People are give them for Christmas presents. That might be cool. So go to pleinairconvention.com. It's in Lake Tahoe and Reno in May 19th through 23rd. So check it out. Okay, well, Joe McGurl is a dear friend of mine. He's a great artist. I'd say he is one of the leading landscape painters in America. He grew up with his dad, who was in the arts. We're going to learn more about that. And he's interested in modern physics and the nature of reality combined with the spirituality that he finds in nature, which has given him a modern approach to his style and his subject. He's one of the few contemporary realists who does not, for philosophical reasons, include the use of photography in his art. We'll talk about that. And he is a devoted plein air painter, and allows him to connect deeply with the landscape on a profound level and gain a deep understanding. So please welcome Joe McGurl. Joe McGurl, welcome to the Plein Air Podcast, man.
It's an honor to be here, Eric. Nice to see you again.
You're all relaxed, just chill, sitting back, no stress, no pressure.
No, not at all. The carefree life of the artist. No deadlines.
No. So what have you been up to these days?
Painting a lot of Western scenes. I have the Coors Western Art Show coming up in January. So I just shipped off 6 paintings to them a couple of weeks ago.
So go ahead.
I did the Idle Joke show in September. So I had 5 paintings that I sent down to them. So I've been painting a lot of Western scenes, which I really like because sort of torn between 2 lovers, the coast and the ocean and the West.
Yeah. So what's that whole Western thing all about from your perspective? I mean, obviously it's hot. Everybody's into it. What is your perspective on it?
Well, I think the whole movie Hollywood thing has given a real boost to it. Horizon and these new Westerns that have come up. But Western movies have always been, kind of popular. And I think the art world is sort of somewhat mimics what's going on in the world in general. It's one of the few places that has really embraced realism, which is kind of nice. The landscape is spectacular, so there's just so much to paint out there landscape-wise, even if you're not painting cowboys and Indians, but I kind of call it cowboy kitsch. Sometimes it's just a little bit over the top, but the landscape is spectacular. And I like painting cowboys. I put little cowboys in a lot of my paintings to give it scale, because the landscape is so vast and it's hard to tell how big that cliff is and how deep that valley is. So if you put a little cowboy there on a horse, it suddenly gives it, a sense of scale, and the viewer can sort of identify with the location, the scene, and just the majesty of it all.
So how did you end up in these Western shows? Because were you originally doing Western paintings that were discovered by them, or did you apply to be in them? What was the background there?
I was invited to be in them. I've been painting out west a little bit, since probably the late '90s. We went out there with several artists and Plein Air Painters of America too. We have a lot of Western trips. Most of the trips are out west. And then there was a very wonderful man, Steve Zimmerman, who was connected with the Idle Joy Museum. And he had bought some of my paintings in New York. And he suggested me to the Idle Joy Museum for their Quest for the West show. And of course, I was thrilled to go. And we've been doing that for probably 12 years or so, maybe. And then a few years later, I got an email from the Coors Western Art Show, and they asked if I would like to participate in their show. So once again, I said yes. And then the last few years, I've been doing the Buffalo Bill show in Cody, Wyoming. So it's kind of a full roster of Western paintings.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So what differences are you seeing by attending these shows? Is there a difference in the collectors? Are these people who are mostly living in the West? Are they people who are pretending to be on Yellowstone? They have a house out there. Can you tell anything about what maybe this group of people buying all these Western paintings is made up of?
Well, it's pretty unique because we don't have anything like that in the East. The core show, they might get 800 or 900 people at the open. I think they had 1,000 last year. And the Idle Joy gets, I don't know, maybe 300 or so. The room is full. It's sold out. And it's really unique. And I think it's most of the people in the core show, a lot of them they have a ranch there, I think, somewhere in the area. They come in for the show. It's also held in conjunction with the National Western Stock Show. So you have a lot of people in town for that too, and they go to the stock show, and then they go to the Idle Joy. I mean, the core show. That's the first show, and then they'll go to the stock show the rest of the week. The Idle Joy, it's in Indianapolis, so it's not really Western, but the museum has a wonderful group of supporters called the Western Art Society, and they're really enthusiastic about the museum and keeping it going and supporting the museum and supporting the artists in the show. So I think they attract two different audiences. The Idle Joy show, it's people who love the museum. In the core show, it's people who love the West and Western lifestyle and cowboys and horses and such.
So I was told by an artist who's very well known in the West that there are a lot of artists who are trying to break in because there's so much money coming out of these Western shows that a lot of artists are trying to break in. And that he said that the collectors can tell if they're the real thing or not, if they're pretending to be about the West, or if they're really all about the West. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I don't live in the West. We do have a horse. That gives me a little legitimacy. But I'm more of a landscape painter too. So when I put a cowboy or horses, whatever, in my paintings, they're small. They're sort of anecdotal. So I wouldn't say that I'm, a Western artist. I'm a landscape painter who paints the West.
Yeah.
I've been going out the West since, as I said, the late '90s. This past year, we went from the Idle Joy show to Cody, Wyoming. It was about a month total. And I painted along the way. We went down to Utah. I did a lot of painting in Utah. So I'm pretty familiar with the Western landscape at this point.
So you're
Yeah.
not an artist who's just grabbing some photos off the internet and painting Western pictures. You're actually out there doing plein air pieces. And
Yeah.
are the pieces you're putting into the shows studio pieces or plein air or both?
Both. Sometimes the shows they'll ask for a small painting or a couple of small paintings and then large paintings. So the small paintings are usually a plein air painting that I brought back and finished up, cleaned up, and put in the show. And the other paintings are studio paintings that I derived from the sketches and things I saw and experienced in the West. And the studio paintings aren't always, they're usually not just an enlarged version of the plein air painting.
Yeah.
The plein air paintings are ways to understand the landscape, and they're almost like investigation. If I were, say, a scientist investigating some phenomena, and I'm not a scientist, I'm an artist investigating a phenomena. So I'll go out there, do a lot of different paintings of different subjects. Oftentimes, though, I'll be attracted to one particular thing, and I'll focus on that a little bit so I understand it a little bit more deeply. Then I'll bring the paintings back, and I'll do some sketches. I'll do an underpainting in black and white gesso and work out a composition. But a lot of times it doesn't have any relation geographic, or it's not just a rendition of something I did in plein air. A lot of times it's made up completely, but it's based on what I learned from doing the plein air paintings.
Well, I was going to ask you that. I think that when you're upscaling something, let's say you've done a plein air work and you decide to do a larger piece from it. It's to me, it's more difficult than it seems it would be, because something changes with the size of the canvas. How do you approach a painting? Let's say you're going to create a very close duplication of what you did in plein air, and you're going to upscale it. Are you going to go for kind of the same style with a looser plein air brush strokes? You're going to go for more finished detail, use bigger brushes, smaller brushes? What's your process like?
It's going to be much more detailed and sort of studied and carefully rendered. The plein air paintings, a lot of times I don't even finish them in the field, because once I've got enough information and I've got what I'm looking for, I don't bother finishing them. When I get back to the studio, if there's some that look like they could make nice finished paintings, I'll clean them up and finish them up and put them out there for sale. But most of the paintings I have from my plein air trips, I've held on to for future reference and such. So if I'm going to make a painting from, say, a Western trip, a lot of times I'll put maybe 3 or 4 paintings out, and I'll look at them and decide which one I want to sort of focus on, but I might take bits and pieces from all of them. And other times it'll be completely imaginary. I'll make the whole scenario up and just work from my imagination, my memory, and things I've learned, sketches and such, which is my favorite way to learn, way to paint, because the fun part for me is like inventing these compositions rather than going out and finding one already made. And that's the wonderful thing about plein air painting and the resulting studio paintings is I can make a believable studio painting from the plein air paintings that I've done on location. And that's really so much different than like portrait or still life painting, because with still life painting, you basically look at your subject and copy it to, one degree or another. And the same with portrait painting. But with landscape painting, you go out or at least I go out and I experience the landscape, do a bunch of sketches so I understand the geography, the topography, the botany, all that, meteorology. And then I can come home and completely compose a painting out of my imagination and my memory, which is so much more fun than just sort of transposing what I saw.
So would that be your favorite thing to do, is to doing it from memory?
Yes.
I mean, from imagination?
Yeah. But every now and then I'll have a plein air sketch that I really like, and I think it'll work as a large painting, and I'll scale it up and it'd be fairly close to what was there.
How much has your painting changed? You've been painting a long time. I don't know how it all began. We should probably talk about that. But how much has your painting changed over let's say in the last 5 years? Do you find that you get to a point where you're fairly comfortable and it's just all about the painting, or do you find that you're trying or experimenting with new techniques or new colors or new approaches constantly?
Yeah, I'm always changing things around a little bit. It might be colors. I rediscovered cerulean blue in the last month. So I've been using a lot of cerulean blue, especially particularly in my skies. Years ago, I was infatuated with purple, and I look at my old paintings, and they're just full of all this purple, like way too much purple. But at the time, I thought, it was really I was infatuated for some reason. Lately, I've been doing a lot with texture, creating texture in the paint that has some type of a tactile resemblance to the actual object I'm seeing. If I'm painting a rocky beach, they'll have a lot of texture. It's not like super aggressive texture, but it's definitely textural. And the sky will be very smooth because the sky doesn't have any texture. So I really like experimenting with different textures and different elements that I'm portraying in the painting. And they'll be correspond somewhat to the actual texture and nature. For instance, if I'm painting, say, a hayfield, I'll have a lot of vertical brush strokes that retain their texture, almost like the hay would in a field. And then if I'm painting a rocky beach, there'll be sort of these round blobs of paint that will somewhat replicate the texture that you would see in a rocky beach. And trees will have sort of this rough, sort of gnarly texture. And so, that's one of the things I've been experimenting with a little bit lately, probably the last 5 years or so.
So are you putting anything in to create texture? Are you putting any glass beads or sand or thickeners or anything into your paint, or are you just doing it with paint alone?
Yeah, all of the above. I put a lot of things into my paint. Try to make sure it's archival. Usually I'll create a lot of the texture in the gesso. And that way I don't have a lot of layers of oil paint, and I don't have thick oil paint. And the gesso is somewhat flexible, more flexible than the oil paint would be. So I think it's a little bit more archivally accurate and archivally permanent, I guess.
So when I studied with you, you were doing underpaintings with acrylic. I think you were doing a monotone underpainting, a grayscale underpainting. Are you saying you're doing that now with gesso, or how are you? What's your process like?
Yes, in the studio I do it with gesso. I just get black and white, and the first step would be to do the whole painting in a black and white, shades of gray, monochromatic underpainting. And the good thing about that is it doesn't take long to do, and if I want to change something, I'm more likely to change it than if I had meticulously drawn out everything and painted in a very careful underpainting. The underpainting is very sloppy. I sort of start sloppy and then I refine it as I go along. And where I haven't spent too much time on the underpainting, I don't worry about changing things. And if I had spent a lot of time on it and painted everything really carefully, I'd say, I spent so much time in the perspective on that building, I don't want to have to redo it.
But why gesso and not just something like acrylic?
Well, for the studio paintings, I think the gesso is a little bit more archival. You go online, there's all kinds of stories about how you should approach a painting. Some people say you can paint oil over acrylic. Other people say you can't paint oil over acrylic, but everyone agrees that you can paint oil over gesso.
Yeah.
So that's why I use the gesso. In the field, if I'm doing plein air sketches, I'll use acrylic, black and white, for an underpainting.
But you're not so concerned about archival in that case.
No, and my field paintings are always based on a hardboard panel or a linen on a panel, so there's not much flexibility. So I'm not worried as much about cracking and things like that could happen 100 years down the road.
So on the bigger pieces, you're using stretched.
Yes, anything bigger than 20 by 30 or so, I use stretched. The panels get too heavy and cumbersome. Shipping gets expensive too. They're heavy.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. That does make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Huh. Interesting. So how did this all begin for you? I seem to remember having a discussion with you. Your dad was a sign painter. Is that right?
He was a jack of all trades. He painted murals. He did. He was always sort of artistic, and he went to Mass College of Art, but he could only afford to go for 2 years. So he did 2 years at Mass College of Art, and then he had a friend whose father owned a church decorating company. So he got a job with him, painting statues, doing gold leafing, restoring old paintings on ceilings, painting new paintings on ceilings, all kinds of things with the marbleizing columns, anything that had to do with painting and decorating churches. And then eventually he decided to strike out on his own. So he started his own little business, painting murals, gold leafing domes. There's a picture I put on Facebook a while ago of him sitting on top of a dome at Harvard University that he was gold leafing, and someone took a photo and put it in the newspaper in the Boston Globe. But he was just a total jack of all trades, and everything he did, he's self-taught. So when I was always, watching him, and I remember in kindergarten, the teacher asked what we wanted to do and grew up, and I know I said I wanted to be an artist. So then in 4th, 5th grade, I started going to the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston for art classes on Saturday mornings. I had a friend, Frank Struzula, who's a wonderful artist, and he would go in with me also. We met in 1st grade, and we're still friends. So anyway,
you were going to classes in the 5th grade?
Yeah, our mothers would drive us in.
And wasn't that pretty unusual for your age?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were the only two that we knew that were doing it, but we'd get there and there'd be 25 other kids there, all doing the same thing. So then I actually stayed at the Museum of Fine Arts through high school. They had a program for older students. It was really good. This teacher, Mr. Ralph Rosenthal, was just wonderful. A really good teacher and sort of mentor and such. And I was also working with my dad all this time too, helping with the murals and all the different projects he was working on. I went to Mass College of Art. I didn't learn very much there. It was the instruction, frankly, wasn't very good. And
were they focusing on realism at the time? Or were they focusing on modernism?
Really, we were kind of the cute realist over in the corner. I think a lot of the teachers wanted us to do more abstract, conceptual type art or whatever. So anyway, then I got out of college and I worked with my dad a little bit. And I knew I wanted to be an artist, but I didn't know how I was going to support myself. So I got a captain's license from the Coast Guard, and I was a yacht captain for a few years because I thought, well, I can do sailing and I can paint on the side and sell my paintings. And I did that for 3 or 4 years and then retired from that because I really wanted to be an artist full time. And my friend Frank Struzula told me about the Guild of Boston Artists. And there was a teacher there, Robert Cormier, who taught figure drawing, sight-size figure drawing. Very academic, very rigorous. And I, for 2 years, studied sight-size figure drawing with him, and it transformed my art completely. My drawing got much better. And as my drawing got better, my paintings got better. As my paintings got better, I started to sell them. And the more I sold, the less of these other things I could do, and I could focus more on painting. So then when I was about 28, I realized I had survived completely the whole past year on art sales. And I was like, wow, it's actually working.
Oh, it's pretty
but it didn't happen until I got some good drawing and some figure drawing in from Robert Cormier. And that really transformed my art. I had no idea what sight-size drawing was or how it worked or anything. And it was like, it's so disciplined that it trains your eye to see shapes rather than objects.
Well, there's some critics that say that sight-size drawing is actually inhibiting you, and that freehand drawing and freehand measurement is the way to go. I've learned both. If you were teaching somebody from scratch, would you start with sight-size?
Absolutely, start with sight-size, because then when you can do that, you can move on to freehand drawing. But sight-size is so disciplined that you can't be sloppy about it. And so you really look really carefully. I remember in college, they would say that, oh, that'll stifle your creativity. Not sight-size drawing, but, being accurate and all that and trying to paint exactly what you see. And I always thought, well, if it stifles your creativity, you don't have much creativity then, because all the great artists in the past were amazing draftsmen, and most of them learned some type of like rigorous drawing program, and a lot of them, like the French Academy, taught sight-size figure drawing. Sargent, that's how he painted. All his paintings were sight-size. They said he wore a path in his rug, walking back and forth to the easel, from the easel to his looking spot. So, sight-size drawing is pretty legitimate.
Well, you still really do that when you're out in the field. You've developed this viewfinder, which I don't know if you still sell them or not, but they're fabulous. And essentially, because that's lined up almost next to your canvas at a slight angle, and you've got it gridded off, so you basically are drawing into the grid what you see in that grid. And so that's essentially sight size, is it not?
Yes, exactly. It's sight size.
I found when you first started telling me to do that, I found it to be an incredible tool for getting my drawing accurate. And I didn't realize how far off my drawing was. And I just wonder why I'm still not using it, because it's still a great tool. And it just, you can't really get the drawing wrong when you're using that.
Right. You have to get used to it. Like now I like rely on it too much maybe. But as I said, when I'm in the field, I'm not trying to be creative. I'm trying to learn and understand the landscape and all the different elements that I'm portraying on the canvas. So the great thing about the sight-size viewfinder is it makes it go much quicker. And in the field, that's really critical, because the sun's moving, so all your shadows are changing, the tide's going out, the wind's coming up, the boat sails away, like all these things happen in the landscape. So you really have to work really quickly. And the sight-size viewfinder just makes it so I can work much more quickly. I could draw it out without it, but it would take longer. And I want to, the painting to proceed as fast as I can make it, so the elements don't change too much. But it takes a while to get used to it. You keep forgetting, and then you get sloppy about looking and lining things up in the viewfinder too. But after you've done it for a while, it becomes second nature, and then it's like I depend on it now. I mean, obviously I could work without it, but it just makes the whole process much quicker and more accurate.
Well, it's a great tool, and I would recommend anybody listening to try it. I would imagine they're for sale on your website, right?
Yes, and I have a sight-size viewfinder website too.
Oh, you do?
Well, yeah, and Facebook page.
Oh, you do?
It's also on my website.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll make sure to put your website up. So, Joe, how much teaching are you doing these days? Are you doing a lot of workshops?
I had been doing a workshop every year at my house, at my home studio here. But COVID came, so then I laid off for like a year of that. And then last year I was just so maxed out. We had our son's wedding at our house, and that took a lot. Yeah. And I had a couple of shows and some big commissions, so I decided to skip it last year. Yeah. But next September I'll be doing another workshop. And what do you? Every now and then I'll teach some at some location somewhere if something looks interesting.
So what do you do differently? If you were to make a pitch for why your workshops are different, I'm not going to say better or worse, but what is it that you focus on in a workshop that might be different than what people expect?
Well, I'll start with the sight-size viewfinder, because that's where the painting begins. And actually, the funny thing about the viewfinder was that I was painting landscapes, and then I thought I was doing the sight-size figure drawing. I thought, is there a way that I can incorporate sight-size figure drawing into landscape painting? So I made this grid out of cardboard, and it was flopping in the wind. So I said, well, that won't do. So then I made one out of wood, and that was a little bit better. And I was using it. And then when I was teaching the workshops, I thought, well, this is silly. I have this viewfinder. I should tell my workshop students about it, so maybe they could make one and try it. So I showed them the viewfinder, and they all thought it was kind of fascinating. And then the next day, one of the workshop students, her husband, made a whole bunch of viewfinders out of wood that night. And she brought them and passed them out to the class. And so then we were all using the viewfinders, and that was kind of fun. And then I thought, well, is there a way I could make more of them so the whole class could use them? And then I contacted this company. Actually, my son worked, he's an industrial designer, and he worked for this company that made things out of metal. So I sent him the plan of it, and he made a whole bunch of metal viewfinders. And then I ended up selling them because I thought, well, it's silly for me to just keep them for the workshop students. And a lot of the workshop students would want to take them home at the end of the workshop. So my workshops would start off with the site-size viewfinder, telling people how to use it and giving them an example. And then I basically walk through the process that I use for creating my paintings, because every artist is different, and no one's right. Everyone's right and everybody's wrong depending on who's taking their workshop. And so I walk them through my process, the acrylic underpainting in the field. And then I mostly focus on drawing, actually, because a lot of times with landscape painting, there are certain things that people do all the time that's not right. For one thing, they never make the foreground big enough. If they're looking at a scene and the center of interest is in sort of the top third of the painting, they don't realize how huge that foreground space is before you get to the center of interest. And then they spend the whole time painting, trying to redraw their painting because they've got these major errors. So I spend a lot of time on drawing and getting the proportions right. And then I also spend a lot of time on color, because that's really one of the most unique things about landscape painting outdoors is the color is such a challenge. When we're painting outside, a lot of times we'll bring your painting in and it looks dark and dull and drab because you were painting outside in the bright sunlight.
Right.
You were painting in the shade and you bring your painting in, it looks pale and washed out because the shade was making your dark colors look darker. So that's always a challenge is, what is your painting going to look like inside? I've done some experiments where I painted exactly what I saw outside with bright sun shining on my panel. And then I bring it inside and it's really dark, like super dark, because I don't have a light bulb as bright as the sun shining on my painting. And then conversely, I've painted paintings in the shade and tried to get the values as close as I could. And when I bring it in, it's really pale because I'm looking at all this bright sunlight, but my painting's dark already because it's in the shade. So then when I bring it in, it's not as dark because I'm not looking at the sunlight with all these dark shadow shapes, if you know what I mean. I actually have a couple of sticks here that I do as an exercise. I have these sort of big, I don't know what you'd call them, mixing sticks.
Stir sticks, yeah.
Stir sticks. And I'll bring them into the field and I'll, let me turn this one the right side up. I'll match all the colors I see from the sky to the foreground. And so this is the sky. This was in Florida, on a beach in Florida. A bright sunny day in Florida. The top, the zenith of the sky, the horizon, and here's the ocean. Here's a wave. Here's a almost breaking wave. And down here is the sand. So what I do is I hold it up and I put a stripe across it and I keep adjusting the color and value until it looks exactly like what I'm seeing. And the stick basically disappears in that section. But as you can see, the colors aren't very bright. They're kind of drab. And this was a bright sunny day in Florida on a beach. If I brought this outside and had the sun shining on it again, it would be really bright and it would look like the colors that we see in nature. So when you're painting outdoors, unlike still life or portrait painting, you have a real challenge because you're painting in a completely different light than the painting is going to be viewed in. Here's another one I did in the desert, the same idea, desert landscape. And these are all the colors as bright. It was in Glen Canyon, this bright, sunny day in the desert. But you can see it doesn't have that same brightness that you would expect to see from colors that were taken directly from nature outside. So I talked a lot about that, the color, and how to overcome that issue of painting outside, but then having your painting viewed inside.
Well, this is a great opportunity to tell the rest of us, because there's not a middle ground, right? You're either painting in the shade or you're painting in the light. So what you're basically teaching then is how to overcompensate when you're painting in the shade.
Yes, you have to sort of exaggerate things a little bit. So if you're painting in the shade, you have to paint your darks darker because your painting isn't going to be seen in the shade. And if you're painting in the sunlight, you have to make your darks lighter. No, sorry. Let me get this straight. If you're painting in the sunlight, everything's going to look darker. So you have to paint lighter. You have to paint brighter, a little bit more vibrant, because you don't have a sunlight bulb shining on your painting.
So is there like is it like one value, two values? Is there any way to measure that?
Not really. A lot of times when I'm in the field, I'll take my painting and turn it into the sunlight halfway through and see how it looks if it's in the shade, and then vice versa. If it's in the sunlight, I'll turn it into the shade and see how it looks. Having an umbrella sometimes helps. Sometimes I'll paint with an umbrella. A lot of times it's just too windy to deal with the umbrella. But that helps a little bit because it gives a softer light to it. But that's the Impressionists struggled with that problem too. And if you look at paintings like Monet's Impression, that famous painting with the red sun that Ray's Impressionist was
kind of the one that started the whole thing.
Yeah. But if you take a black and white photo of that painting, the sun is actually darker than the sky, because Monet realized that if he made the sun too light and pale, it would lose that punch and that power. So he kept it darker than the sky, but it still has that strength of power to it. But and you're not aware of it, that it's really darker than the sky. But if you take a black and white image of it, it's darker than the sky, which is obviously an impossibility. So they were struggling with that same issue too, how to keep things vibrant when you brought them indoors. Particularly in that era, they had these dark interiors with gas lamps or candles or whatever, and indoors was really dark.
So you really got to push your color.
Yes, to a degree. You can go overboard too. So that's, for me, I'm trying to recreate as closely as I can what I experienced out of doors. I'm not trying to be an impressionist or a tonalist. I'm trying to recreate the feelings, the response that I had to nature when I was outdoors in the studio. So I have to push the colors somewhat, but not like go overboard. I'm not a colorist, I would say.
Right. So you're trying to avoid the garish color. And are you graying things down quite a bit when you're trying to create that effect, or are you doing the opposite?
No, I'm probably spicing things up a little bit to still give the effect of light, because when you're painting a landscape, you're painting light, atmosphere, air, space, all these things that are sort of elusive. And so, like, if you're painting a still life, you have those things, but not to the same degree, or a portrait. You have light, but it's not like the bright intensity of sunlight. And you have space, but it's a few feet. It's not several miles. And you have atmosphere, but unless you're a heavy smoker, there's not a lot of atmosphere in your studio. But outdoors, you have, this incredible atmosphere. So you're painting these really elusive elements. And so oftentimes I have to, spice up certain aspects and subdue other aspects depending on what I'm trying to do. But that's the amazing thing about landscape painting is you're really painting these three things that you can't really touch and don't exist: light, space, and atmosphere. And for me, that's a big difference between painting from a photograph and painting an actual landscape from nature, where a photograph has no light, it has no space and no atmosphere. It's just a flat piece of paper. And you're just copying shape and color and value from the photo to your canvas. Where painting plein air, you're painting the actual elusive elements that you see out there. And then when you come into the studio, you've got to figure out how to paint those elusive elements, light, space, and atmosphere, which there's no real one way. It's sort of different. Every painting is a little bit different. Every artist approaches it differently. So I think that's one of the real challenges of landscape painting as opposed to other modes of painting.
Hey, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'll be brief. There's an event coming up in January designed to help anyone who is an artist figure out how to explode their art career. We have put together a full day called Art Business Mastery Day, and it is taking place on January 10th. And you can get in there, and it's only $45 US to attend. It is a bargain. Why did I do it for that price when I could have sold it for thousands of dollars or at least hundreds of dollars? And the reason is I want you there. I want you there because I want you to have a great year. I'm tired of people complaining about how bad business is, and I'm going to show you how to make your business good, whether it's a good economy or not. I'm going to teach you a lot about art marketing and a lot about art business. We have experts who are going to be teaching with us about various topics, including social media and advertising and other things. So make sure you go to your calendar, circle January 10th, and then go to streamlineartevents.com/marketing. Okay. streamlineartevents.com/marketing. Okay. That's all I got for now. One of the things you're very well known for is the sparkle that you managed to get on water. You showed me how you did it. I've watched you do it a couple of times. I still can't do it like you can do it. You must have the perfect touch. I guess it's probably having done it 1,000 times. But what is the key to getting that sense of sparkle, that sense of reflecting the light coming down from the sun?
Yeah, that's something that's really fascinated me. When I was a kid, from my bedroom window, I could see the glare on Quincy Bay, where I grew up. And it was just always fascinating. I remember the first time I painted a painting like that was in college. And I did this painting of a pier jutting out into the water with the glare behind it. And I really liked it. It was really fascinating. I've been kind of working on that off and on for most of my career, I guess. It really comes down to values, controlling the values around the glare, and even in the glare itself, changing the value and color just a little bit from the center where it's really white hot towards the edges of the glare patch where it gets a little bit warmer and a little bit darker. And then where the glare interacts with the surrounding, like if it's water, it would, at the edge of the water where it's not reflecting the sun, it's going to be lighter and warmer than, a distance away where it's really reflecting the sky. And even in this one, you can see this sort of a halo of light around that spot on the shoreline. And the shoreline, if you sort of squint, you can see this sort of halo where the light is refracting through the atmosphere and also through the rocks and pebbles on the beach.
So I think that's fascinating how you've pulled that off. And so you're basically trying to create, you're darkening as you get away from the brightest spot so that you create that more intensity. Is that right?
Yeah, it's like a halo of light around the light spot. Yeah. And depending on, the painting you just showed was calm water. But if it was, ripply water or rougher water, there'd be like sort of these sparkly glare bits on the water. And what I usually do is as it moves further from directly under the sun, it gets a little bit not quite as strong, not quite as bright. And then the elements around the glare spot I'll make a little bit brighter as the light sort of refracting and bouncing off the molecules in the atmosphere. And that helps to create that illusion of there's something being really intensely bright in the center and then not quite as bright as it moves away from the center of light.
So really the same kind of applies to when painting the sun, not necessarily hitting water, but kind of hitting the atmosphere.
Right. Like this painting that's up now it's really about, I think I called it light streams. And it's, it's really a painting about light. And there again, painting that elusive element that you can't touch or feel, but you can see it. And it's, just, it's a fascination because it's sort of painting something that's impossible in a way. And there again, that's the thing that fascinates me about landscape painting is you're trying to paint something that's impossible to paint because it's so far removed. It's paint and canvas, and you're trying to paint space, light, and atmosphere. So it's a never-ending challenge, and I like it because if I thought I had conquered the challenge, I'd be done, and I'd say, well, I guess that's it, folks.
What are you struggling with right now? What is there one thing in particular that's very difficult for you?
It's always composition. Sometimes I'll have a painting and I like everything about it, but the composition doesn't draw you in. It just doesn't work. And
do you have any hard and fast rules you try to adhere to for composition?
no, because then you end up being formulaic. It's like, Edgar Payne wrote that wonderful book, The Composition of Outdoor Paintings. But so many times I'll look at landscape paintings and I see Edgar's, like his different schemes that he has. He even named them all.
Right. Steel yard and
such, yeah.
S-curve and yeah.
And I like it when I see someone doing a painting that is a completely unique composition, and it works too. So that's kind of what I strive for. But a lot of times you just can't avoid the sort of the classic composition. And then I said, well, that's fine because this isn't really about composition. It's about light or atmosphere or the object that I'm painting or something like that.
So do you find that there are some elements of composition, that we oftentimes, I critique paintings sometimes on Fridays, and what I oftentimes find is that, usually if somebody's putting the horizon dead center or putting something dead center, and yet, here's a painting, the horizon is almost dead center and the S curve is kind of off to the right instead of a traditional S curve, and yet it works so beautifully. So there's not really anything that is a must from what I can tell.
Yes, exactly. Like I think this one works because your eye sort of goes around the river, but then it stops with that tree on the right that's sticking up. And then the mountain in the background, that diagonal line, there again, that leads your eye in, but it stops at that tree. So the tree sort of puts the brakes on it. And I think that there's a lot of movement in it. So you don't mind the horizon being somewhat in the center of the painting because you're not looking at that. If you relax your eye sort of goes along the bend of the river to the tree and then down the mountain to the tree. But if I didn't have that tree on the right side, it would be very boring because your eye would just go straight across that horizon. But the tree stops your eye from continuing up the panel.
So what else do your students struggle with? Are you finding that you said drawing, composition, would that be number 2?
Yeah, that would probably be number 2. And number 3 is rendering, just making the tree look like a tree. And particularly in plein air painting, you've got, maybe a couple hours of light that's consistent if you're lucky. And so you've got to paint 10,000 leaves on a tree in a minute or two. And how do you do that? And, waves, you've got thousands of waves on the ocean that you're looking at, and they're moving. So how do you paint that? So I spent a little bit of time showing them little tricks that I've done to indicate that, because obviously you can't paint everything that you see in a landscape. And there again, that's something that's different from still life and portrait paintings, because if you're painting, a flower, you can paint pretty much everything exactly as you see it. So and the same with the portrait. You can paint the portrait pretty much exactly as you see it. But when you're painting a tree, or you're painting the ocean, or a rocky beach, you have to figure out ways to indicate the objects without actually rendering each object.
So how do you do it?
A lot of palette knife. That works well. I have these things I call scruffy brushes, where I take a paintbrush and give it a really bad haircut so it's all raggedy at the end. And that works really good for indicating trees, like leaves on trees. I use these rubber wipeout tools. They're called paint shapers.
Yeah.
It's just a rubber nib, almost like the back of an eraser. And I drag that back and forth through the wet paint oftentimes. In the studio, I have a whole drawer full of gizmos that I use to create different textures and effects in my paintings. Because in nature, there's so much variety too. You have clouds, and even in clouds, there's so much variety in clouds. And then you have trees and palm trees and willow trees and evergreens and maples. And then you have grass and hay, and it just goes on. And each element, each feature has its own unique shape and texture. And so you've got to figure out, and particularly in plein air painting, how can I paint that in like 30 seconds? Because I got so many other things to tackle in this painting.
So would you say that you lay down the big shapes of a tree first, and then you go in and lay the texture in with your tools, or what would your process be there?
Yes, the big shapes first, and then put on the details later. And if you get the shape, the value, and the color right, it's oftentimes you don't need all that much detail. But since we are painting a tree that has tons of leaves, for me, I want to indicate the leaves. I don't want to just have sort of a broad brush stroke indicate the shape and the form of the tree. I want to indicate the shape, the form, and the texture of the tree. Because once again, the difference between landscape painting and still life or portrait painting is there's so many textural surfaces that you've got to somehow address.
So we're looking at a painting here of a boat and a barn on a hill. For those of you listening to the podcast, you'll have to look for the visual version. I can't zoom in on it, but you're amazing with boats. You have incredible ability to make boats look right, and I think boats are so difficult. Is there a process that you follow that really helps people with boats?
Well, I know the shape of boats because I've painted them so often. I've been involved in boats my whole life, and as I said, I was a yacht captain for a few years, living on a boat. So I'm really familiar with the subject. The hard thing about boats is there's these sort of compound curves. You have what's called the sheer, which is the deck which swoops up, but then you have if you look down on it, you have the shape that's sort of like a seed shape that's going like that. So when you look at an angle, you have these shapes that are doing two things at once. It's swooping out, but it's also going up. And I think if you're aware of that, it helps you to look for it a little bit more carefully. And, the best way to paint boats well is just to keep painting them, paint them from life, and maybe paint one boat and walk around it from different sides, different angles. The problem nowadays, though, is boats are getting so ugly. The contemporary boats, you just can't paint them. They're ugly. And it's really, actually, I think it destroyed the marine art market because, 20, 25 years ago, there was a really vibrant marine art market out there. But, boats have just progressively gotten uglier and uglier. And if you put one in a painting, no one wants one. So you end up painting sort of nostalgic older boats. I guess it's kind of like the West, they're painting the Indian with the blanket and we paint the schooner. Yeah. But for painting boats, I love painting boats because I love boats. And they're like the cowboys I put in the paintings. They give a sense of scale and sometimes a focal point and just something going on. Because when you go out in the ocean, there are boats. So it's silly to paint a seascape and have no boats. It's like, what happened to all the people in the boats? And the same with the West. I mean, obviously you can go out and find places with no one there, but we're part of the world and we're part of the environment. So it just makes paintings a little bit more interesting when you add a boat or a cowboy or car.
You said something to me one time. If I don't want to misquote you, but it seems what I remember is the minute you add a figure, the painting becomes about the figure.
Right. That's why I paint my figures really small. If I do a Western scene, for instance, you look at the cowboys and the horses, they're pretty small because the first thing I want you to see is the landscape. And then secondarily, you look and you see the figures. And even with my marine paintings with the boats, they're not really portraits of boats. There'll be boats in them. but the subject is still the landscape or the seascape. There are some painters that, the subject is a boat. They're painting, you look at the painting, it's a painting of a sailboat or something. But with mine, it's a landscape or a coastal scene, and there's a boat in it.
Is there an artist from the past that you wish you had met, that you wish you could talk to ask questions? Or can you get what you need from looking at their paintings?
Frederick Church would be probably my all-time favorite artist.
Why?
Because he was able to paint the landscape so convincingly, so beautifully. But when you look at the actual locations where he painted them, they don't look at all like that in real life. So he kind of did what I'm trying to do, is paint a painting, but not like just sort of painting what you see and copying it. He was
so it's an interpretation.
Right. It was an imagination and knowledge sort of combined. He was, really a scientist in a way too. A lot of his plein air sketches and such, it's like he was investigating a certain aspect of this planet. And then, and I made a painting from it. And he was, if you look at, like, there's a painting that probably my favorite all-time landscape painting, Aurora Borealis, that Frederick Church did, that he obviously didn't paint it on location, but he looked at the Aurora Borealis so intently that he understood it. And then he could make a studio painting based on what he had learned. It's just amazing painting. I think he painted in Greenland. He went out on a schooner, and they were, it's in the winter, and there's the Aurora Borealis in the sky, and down below there's this tiny little ship in the ice, and it's just a fantastic painting.
And he did not have the benefit of photography to remind him.
No. And, he didn't need it. And I think most artists maybe rely on photography too much. And, the difference, as I said before, between painting from a photograph and painting life is that you have these elements that don't exist in the photograph. And it's not like I posted a photograph of something on Facebook, and some said, I thought you don't use photographs. I said, I don't paint photographs, but I look at them. And even when I was, first starting the Western scenes, like horses and such, I looked at them because when I was going to the Museum of Fine Arts when I was a kid, we had this big file catalog of reference photos, and everything was alphabetical. And if I was going to paint a horse, I didn't really know what a horse looked like. So we could look at what a horse looked like. But if we copied that horse exactly as we saw it, or pretty much, our teacher would come along, Mr. Rosenthal, and he'd rip your paper in half and say, don't copy it. The file is for understanding the anatomy of a horse, but not copying it. And so we'd be all doing artwork, and all of a sudden we'd hear this rip in the background and say, oops, someone copied from the photo file. So I think a lot of artists, they rely on a photograph too much, and they copy the photograph exactly as they see it. Rather than, we used to call it reference, a reference file, and using photograph for reference. For instance, schooners, like the rigging in schooners. I know how the rigging goes, but if I were painting a schooner and I didn't know anything about schooners, but I wanted to put in the painting, I wouldn't have any problem looking at a picture of a schooner and seeing how the rigging went. I wouldn't want to copy that schooner and, verbatim and stick it into my painting.
Well, John Stobart told me one time, he said, those of us who do marine art, we know the rigging so well. He said, we'll count the rigging and know if it's right or not.
Yeah. We call them rivet counters, because they count all the rivets in the ship to make sure they didn't miss one. But I mean, I don't mind using reference for reference, trying to understand how something is, but I don't copy like what I saw.
Yeah. So if you're doing a big studio painting and you're needing more detail, and you didn't get that detail in your study, then you could pull up that photo for ideas on how other details were present. Would that be the case?
No, I wouldn't use it for that, because if I didn't know the detail about, say, foliage or some type of desert plant, I wouldn't put it in the painting. But if I was painting, say, I don't know, well, like a horse jumping over something, or I don't think I've done that, but I'd want to look at what the position of a horse would be jumping over a rail or something like that. I say, oh, that's how the legs go. And I'd say, okay, now I know how the legs go.
Do you ever hear that story about Ernest Mesenier and how he did horses?
No, what did he do?
There's a book. There's a book about him, and what he did is he always got the legs of the horse wrong, and they never realized that until photographs when they show a horse jumping. He always put the horses in a different position, but he had somebody run a horse around a ring over and over again while he stood there with his sketch pad for 8 hours. And they ran the horse around the ring and made it jump, and he'd try to capture that in the sketch. And then they just keep running him, and to the point that it killed the horse.
Oh. So the things they do for art. But actually, yeah, because I think before Maybridge's photos came out, they didn't know whether all four horses' hoofs were off the ground at the same time when he was running.
Right.
And then when the photos came out, they said, oh, they are all off the ground at the same time. So it's like, things like that I would look at a photo if I had to know. Like, for instance, I did a painting of, it was for a charity, the boat in Jaws.
Yeah.
Anyway, I did a painting of that. Obviously, I had to look at a photograph to see what the boat looked like. And then I'm going to do a painting of Hemingway's boat, Pilar. And since the boat's in Cuba, I'm not going to go down there and, draw it. So
you should. It's worth seeing.
I heard it's beautiful there.
Oh, it's
but
incredible.
I'll get a photo, see what the boat looks like, what the shape is, and then I'll do a painting, but it's not going to look like the photo that I looked at. But the structure of the boat will be, the same. So that's, I don't have a problem using photograph for that at all. But for me, it would just be redundant and kind of boring copying a painting like from a photograph, a landscape.
So what is your best advice for somebody? I've got two questions. Best advice for people who are just learning plein air painting, and best advice for somebody who's been doing it, but they want to push themselves to a higher level.
10,000 hours. For plein air painting, it's really just get good equipment, because a lot of beginner painters, they sort of cheap out on the equipment. They don't buy good equipment, and it's frustrating. The thing's falling apart, and so get good equipment, which means a sturdy easel, something not too heavy, stool. If you use an umbrella, you need stakes because it's going to be windy and your umbrella's going to blow away.
Do you sit down when you paint?
I do both. Sometimes I'll sit, sometimes I stand. If I sit, I tend to really focus in more intently, and I get a little bit more finished product. But sometimes I sit too long and I stand back and say, ooh, that composition is terrible. But I don't really care because, as I said before, I'm not trying to make a finished painting. I'm trying to gather information. If I stand, then I walk back and forth and I see it at a distance better, and I can understand the composition a little bit better.
How far back do you need, depending on the size of the canvas, how far back do you need to go to make sure that you're getting the right viewpoint?
10 feet or so, just so I see the shapes rather than the details. That's one thing that trips up a lot of artists. They get hung up at looking at the details rather than the shapes. Also, turning the canvas upside down and looking at it that way really helps. And that's what one thing I learned from Mr. Rosenthal at the Museum of Fine Arts was he'd come around, and the first thing he'd do was turn my painting upside down and say, okay, what do you see? And right away, I'd see these awkward shapes or things that weren't working right. And so turning your painting upside down, particularly after like you do the underpainting, if you do a monochromatic underpainting, turning it upside down and just looking at the shapes and see if there are awkward shapes, that really, really helps. So getting good equipment is really critical for outdoor painting, because I call it plain in the ass painting or plein air painting, because it's difficult. And just overcoming the physical challenges are, a hurdle in itself. Then what was the other part of that question? All right.
Pushing yourself to a higher level.
I think just doing it more,
Can you remember a time when you were really struggling with something and then you finally broke through and maybe how did you do that?
Let's see, what would be a good example? Okay, well, here's an example that I was talking earlier about the viewfinder in the foreground. And my paintings were, the drawing wasn't working. And I think I was focusing, I would see a scene and there'd be something really intriguing. And in my mind, it took up like half of the canvas. And then I'd be drawing it out and I'd realize it's tiny. It's like as big as a quarter. It's this tiny little object, but I was so focused on it, I thought it was bigger and it was goofing up my drawing. And the whole way through the painting, I'd be slowly adjusting the drawing, trying to get all the elements to fit. And I think that's one of the big problems that landscape painters have is when we see something in the distance, our eyes focus on it, and in our mind, it's much bigger than it actually is. But there again, if you use the viewfinder, you hold the viewfinder up and you say, wow, that's tiny. Because you don't have any reference point when you're just looking at the whole sky and the whole earth and nothing to figure out how big that beautiful rock face and that cliff is compared to the whole scene. So that's one thing that I really learned at one point that was a breakthrough, that I can't focus on the center of interest unless it's big enough to be focused on. And that's difficult with landscape painting because you say, well, if I get closer to that cliff face, it'll be larger. But sometimes you can't get closer. There's a river or a valley, or it's too far away. So I think the proportions that you see in nature, your mind can alter them. And sometimes that's a good thing. Like there's Bierstadt's Rocky Mountain painting that's in the Metropolitan Museum. And I remember I was in college and the teacher put it up and she was sort of criticizing it because the mountains were too big. She said, that was ridiculous. Those mountains, they'd be like 7,000 feet high if they were that big. And then a while later it dawned on me, I said, but he wasn't painting what they looked like. He was painting what they felt like.
Right.
So that's one of the critical things with plein air painting too, is you're painting what your emotion is telling you is happening. So maybe that rock face that's, too small, your emotions are saying it's bigger. And so sometimes you can adjust the drawing and adjust everything so it actually is bigger. Sometimes it just doesn't work, it's too far away. But that's the big thing about plein air painting too, is it's so emotional for me because we have all these massive and beautiful things in our planet to paint. And sometimes you have to just sort of cave into your emotions and paint what you feel rather than what you see, particularly when you're in the field. I mean, that's always a balancing act for me because I want to keep it accurate so I can make something back at the studio based on what I felt.
So how do you paint what you feel? Now you articulated one moment where you might make a mountain bigger because that mountain is important to you. But I think it's easy to say, but how do you do it? How do you implement feel?
I think you go with your emotions, but then again, you have to keep them checked so it doesn't get ridiculous. But I think you kind of go with your emotions. You say, oh, that feels like a sunset or something. That feels much warmer and oranger than it actually is because I'm feeling the heat on my body and everything's warm. And so sometimes you can do that. You can get away with that and you make it much. If you would take a photograph, for instance, cameras have no feeling. So if you took a photo of that, it would make it look like there's a lot of purple and gray in there. But if you're looking at it, you say, oh my God, look at that orange and that red. So, that's the emotional part of landscape painting where your body is responding to the landscape as well as your eyes and your mind and all that. Where with a photograph, your body isn't responding to it at all. You're just looking at colors and such. So that can sometimes be a problem working with photographs too. They're too literal and they're not emotional enough. And for me anyway, landscape painting is extremely emotional. It's just, I'm in love with the landscape of our planet. It's just astounding how beautiful it is. And
there's some place that you've never painted that you've wanted to?
Everywhere. There's so many places. Like when we go places, I always bring my paints and I say, well, if I went someplace, I wouldn't go someplace that wasn't beautiful. And if I'm going to someplace beautiful, I obviously want to paint it. So whenever Patty and I go on a vacation, it ends up being part of a painting trip too.
Yeah.
Well,
it's kind of difficult, isn't it? Managing that relationship with painting and the relationship with
yeah, she's a really good sport about it though. Like when we went out west, she was with me the whole time, and I would be painting every day virtually. And she comes and she'll read a book, or she'll go on a hike. She'll run off and get some lunch and bring it back or something. Or she's a really big walker, so she really likes going out and hiking when we go off painting.
Well, that's nice, because otherwise, you're feeling the pressure. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, when are you going to be done with this painting?
Well, the only thing that drives it crazy is we get back at like 8:30 and I'm pooped. We're both tired and hungry, and we don't want to go out to a restaurant or do something like that. And we're usually in the hotel room, so we end up having nachos every night. I said, Patty, this is how it is when I'm on the road. It's nachos for supper.
Well, that's life. Life as a painter.
Yeah.
Joe, is there anything else that we need to talk about before we wrap?
I think we probably covered a lot. Nothing that's like, burning on my mind right now. It was really nice talking to you though, and enjoyed our conversation as always. You're a great host and a great conversationalist, and know a lot about art.
It's easy. All I have to do is ask questions, and you do all the hard work. Well, I appreciate you being on the Plein Air Podcast.
It was my pleasure to be on. I was thrilled when you asked me, and look forward to seeing you again sometime soon. I'll see you at the convention in the spring.
Oh, that's right. You're going to be at the Plein Air convention. That's exciting. Lake Tahoe. We've found some. I went out a couple of weeks ago, and we found some incredible spots to paint, and it's going to be a lot of fun. Including, one day we're gonna all wear our cowboy hats and our boots, and we're gonna go to Virginia City, which is one of the original Western towns, and the views behind Virginia City are absolutely amazing. A lot of the rock formations, like what you've got in some of your paintings, but also if you wanted to put an old saloon in it, you could do that.
Yeah, well, that's fun. Yeah, have the shootout in the Main Street.
Yeah, absolutely.
I suppose for us,
we're there's gold miners and donkeys and all kinds of things. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, great.
We have a couple other really cool ideas in store too that we're working on. So
yeah,
we'll have all that done. Well, Joe, I'll see you at the convention. And again, thank you for doing this today.
My pleasure. Thank you for asking. Bye.
Wow, that blew me away. That was fabulous. Thank you, Joe. Thanks for doing this. Don't forget to visit Joe's website at josephmcgurl.com, and you can follow him on Instagram at josephmcgurl. And Joe, by the way, has that rangefinder or viewfinder thing on his website, which is really cool. I don't typically promote products for other people, but I would promote this one. So go get it. It's really good. I have one. I'm gonna pull it out and start using it again because I haven't been using it. We have a couple of really great videos that Joe did on PaintTube TV. PaintTube TV is our website that has over 700 professionally produced art instruction videos that we've created. And he has two of them, one called Advanced Landscape Painting, and the other is Painting Light and Atmosphere. Both of them are phenomenal. So make sure you pick those up at painttube.tv. Again, thank you to Joe. Now let's go to the Art Marketing Minute.
This is the Marketing Minute with Eric Rhoads, author of the #1 Amazon bestseller, Make More Money Selling Your Art, Proven Techniques to Turn Your Passion into Profit.
Got questions? We've got answers. Just send them to me, Eric at artmarketing.com. By the way, a good website to check out, artmarketing.com. Okay, so I'm seeing these questions for the first time, so you may be stumping me. This comes from Amanda Murray Griffey, and the question is, how do I find my ideal client or audience? Well, it's a good question to be asking. So it's not easy. I'll tell you that. Here's how I do it, but it depends on where you are in your journey. So what I try to do, I don't always do this, and so people will hold my feet to the fire when I say this because I have not always done it. But I made an agreement with one of my art galleries. I was in three. I'm about to be in two more. Um, so I made an agreement and I said, listen, I want to be able to send a personal note or at least do a personal phone call to every person who ever buys my artwork. I will not try to sell them something else and go around you because that's important for them to understand. And so what I try to do is I always send a note thanking them for buying my artwork, a personal note, but I like to call them and thank them. And the reason I like to call them is because I want to know more about them. And I love it when the gallery will take a picture of them with my painting. Why? Because automatically I'm going to know, what age range are they? Are they elderly? Are they young? Are they, or whatever they are? That will help me understand them. And then I'm looking for patterns. If I get a chance to call somebody, I call and thank them, and I say, "Hey, tell me about yourself." And they'll say, "Well, we do this, I do this for a living. Here are our interests and things like that." So those give you clues, and you're constantly playing detective, and those clues will help you to really try and understand a little bit more about who your audience is. Now, I have changed my opinions about things. I'm like a politician who flip flops, right? And the sense is that I used to always say, paint for the market. And if you're purely just trying to make a living and you want to sell a lot of artwork, then that's a really good answer. It's paint for the market. But what I think is more important is to paint for yourself, right? Paint what you love. Just because the gallery says, "Hey, we could have sold 500 more of those little red barns." If you're not into painting little red barns anymore, then paint what you love, because what you love will come across much better than anything else you can possibly do. If if on the other hand, your option is to go do janitorial work or paint a few extra paintings that will sell because of the subject matter, at least you're painting, right? I have friends who actually paint for other artists. They paint them for other artist commissions and things like that. Then the artist signs his name to them, which I think is a little weird. And maybe the artist paints on it so he can pretend not to be lying or something. But I mean, at least you're painting and you're generating income from painting rather than doing something that you'd rather not be doing. But I do think finding your ideal client is good. You can pay close attention to who follows you on social media, but anybody follows anybody, and it's hard to get any demographics from that. So the best way is to find out who's buying your work or who's interested in your work. And of course, if you have a gallery, ask them, keep an eye on who's buying my work, who's interested, who's buying other people's work. Try to find out, because maybe then what you can do is help your marketing appeal a little bit more to those people. Next question comes from Simon in the United Kingdom. Simon says, "I wondered if you had some thoughts on how to market wall art, originals and prints, for sales at shows and exhibitions for someone who wishes to step away from using social media. Many traditional marketing channels seem to have become less popular and less available, and social media is awash with pictures. What channels, maybe some novel ones, may be available so that the message gets noticed?" Well, Simon, that's an interesting term. I think that must be a term you use in the UK. Wall art. We would just call it art, but art that hangs on a wall makes sense. Well, I don't think there are a lot of channels. I'm always looking for new ways to sell things, but think about the channels. The channels are art galleries, art shows, or art fairs. These are the shows that, like I'll be going to Art Palm Beach in February, and that's a big art show. And it's basically like a shopping mall filled with art from really, really high-end art dealers. And it's a really great show. There's dozens of those. So that's an option for you, but you're going to have to work through a dealer unless you can get your own booth, which you might be able to do, but it's a big investment. And then, okay, so then there's art fairs. art fairs would be the ones with tents. Every city has one. And so selling in art fairs. And if you're selling in art fairs, you got to have a little bit of a different strategy, I think, because you're less likely to sell as many originals as you're more likely to sell prints. And a lot of friends of mine do this, and they have prints out there. They sell an occasional original, but most of them sell prints. And, they'll sell 50 or 100 prints in a day for anywhere from $25 to $55, $75. And so they're making some good money, and it helps them pay their bills. And so that works out pretty well. So, okay, we covered shows and fairs. Then, of course, there's art galleries. I think art galleries are terrific because art galleries can be selling while you sleep, right? Because let's say you're in England. If you have an art gallery, a couple art galleries in the United States, they're literally open when you're sleeping, right? But you can have art galleries anywhere, and they're out there promoting your work along with other things. And you're in an environment where people are coming in to look at art, and so they're more interested in art. In terms of many of the traditional marketing channels becoming less popular, I'm not sure what is driving that thought process. Maybe you're seeing something I'm not seeing. The reality is that some art galleries do great, some are not doing great. A lot of that has to do with the art gallery themselves. A lot of it has to do with the art that's in the gallery. But in general, I think, galleries are a great option if you can get into them and get invited into them. Social media, you say it's a wash with pictures. Yes, it is. And, people are flipping through pictures quicker than they could clicking a clicker on a slideshow. They're going back and forth, up and down. So you got to have something that's going to catch their attention. And if you have followers, just remember that if you're on Instagram, Facebook, etc., only 3% of the people that follow you are actually seeing what you post, because they don't send it to everybody. Only if there's engagement. So one of the best ways to engage people is to comment. And rather than, just trying to figure out how to drive people to your website, see what people are doing on other social media accounts, and then do smart comments on it, and then they'll look you up, and then they'll see your work. Now, that might be another way to do it. One thing that is not being taken well advantage of that is a great opportunity is LinkedIn. There are a lot of art forums on LinkedIn. There are a lot of people who are selling and buying art on LinkedIn. So I think that's terrific. And of course, Etsy is really a great opportunity, and maybe to some extent eBay. I see artists selling paintings on both of those platforms all the time. And I think those are really terrific platforms. And there are other ones out there. There are some that I think you can put your work into, maybe even things like Walmart.com. I'll double check that. I don't know that for sure. But, there's a lot of different places. And it's a lot of these things are price sensitive depending on where you're going, but a lot of them are not. So I wouldn't worry about that. Just, I would say don't tell yourself any stories, right? I just had a big meeting with somebody, and they're like, oh, nobody's buying this anymore and we should change it. And I said, no, that's just not true. We're just not reaching enough people. Right. So you get to the point where you feel like you've saturated everything, and that might be a story, or it might be related to something else. Like, I don't know about the UK, but here in the United States, the economy's been pretty awful. Right. And it's been awful for 3 years, and everybody's been lying to us and telling us how good it is, but it isn't. And so every business owner I know is suffering. I was on a forum, a podcast the other day from some advertising agencies, and they were talking with one another, or 40 or 50 of them. They were all talking about how bad business was. So, it's sometimes things are cyclical. You should have a strategy, and we're going to give you a recession strategy when I do the Art Business Mastery Day on January 10th. You want to be sure to attend that. It's only $45, and we have people already signed up from all over the world. And if you can't watch live, then you can get a replay package and watch on replay. But we want you to be there if you can be live. That'll be good. But you said the last part of the question was, what other channels, maybe some novel ones, may be available so that the message gets noticed? Listen, Simon, the message gets noticed when the message is compelling, right? In an email, everybody raise your hand if you know this. The number one thing on an email success factor is what? The number one thing on the success of an email is the subject line. Do you know what the number two thing is? It's called the alt text. That's that little text that you see after the subject line. So those are the first things that make you decide if you're going to open an email. So they got to be attention getting and grab you. The next thing is once they open the email, you got to have a really strong, compelling headline, a really great image, a great caption, a caption that's interesting. Then you got to have a really great first paragraph. And then that's got to lead you down, pull you through to a really great second paragraph and so on. Those things make all the difference in the world. And in marketing, attention getting is the whole game, right? So Jaguar, which you're familiar with because it's from the UK, has just done this controversial campaign using a lot of very colorful people. And it really rocked a lot of people, got people talking about it. And whether or not it's effective was yet to be determined. I think it's going to be highly effective because they got people talking about them and they got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of free media time from other people talking about them. Now everybody's curious about this new Jaguar, right? So whether or not it was a good move, I think it was a good move because they were being controversial. They got, there are people out there that get people to talk about them. They say things that are wild and crazy, and all of a sudden everybody's talking about them. That's how you get free media, is by coming up with messaging that gets noticed. Now, you have to manage what's appropriate for your reputation, but you can get noticed by them. Anyway, I hope it helps, and I hope you guys will consider attending this event. I think it'll be helpful. By the way, Mondays at noon, that is Eastern time, New York City time, I do Art Marketing Mondays, and that's on my YouTube show. Just go to YouTube and look up Art School Live, okay, and watch it on Monday. Well, that is the Art Marketing Minute.
This has been the Marketing Minute with Eric Rhoads. You can learn more at artmarketing.com.
I want to thank you for listening, and I hope it's helpful. Send your questions to me, Eric at artmarketing.com. And thanks again to Joe McGurl. I want to tell you about one other thing I didn't mention before, but I will mention because it's right around the corner. It's starting to get cold in a lot of places, and there's a lot of snow in a lot of other places. Watching a football game the other day with a lot of snow, it blew me away. And it gets to be about February, and it's like, okay, I'm done with this. I'm tired of not seeing the sunshine. I want to go painting. I went painting once. I was cold. I didn't like it. So we're doing this thing called the Winter Art Escape. We're doing it in St. Augustine, Florida. It's going to be in February, and it's a week of painting. It's my retreat. I do one in February, I do one in June, I do one in the fall. And so this is my Florida retreat. First time we've ever done it. It's a little different than the others. We've got some bigger perks, a little bit more stuff going on. It's completely different. They're all different. And it's going to sell out here soon because of Christmas. So make sure you get signed up. It's called winterartescape.com. Okay. Reminder to go to the Art Business Mastery Day, and you find that at streamlineartevents.com/marketing. Did I say that right? Is it Streamline Art Events? streamlineartevents.com/marketing. And last but not least, I want to mention that the Plein Air Convention is coming up. You do not want to miss it. It's going to be fun. Lake Tahoe, only 200 seats left. Just go to pleinairconvention.com. And please get our 201 free Plein Air tips at pleinairmagazine.com/ebook. And if you've not seen my blog where I talk about stuff and things, life and art and other things, check it out. It's called Sunday Coffee. You can find it for free at coffeewitheric.com. I am Eric Rhoads, publisher of Fine Art Connoisseur and Plein Air Magazine, and I want to thank you for being here today. Remember, it's a big world. Go out and paint it. And if you haven't learned how to paint it, find somebody to teach you because it's a whole lot of fun. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
This has been the Plein Air Podcast with Plein Air Magazine's Eric Rhoads. You can help spread the word about plein air painting by sharing this podcast with your friends. And you can leave a review or subscribe on iTunes so it comes to you every week. And you can even reach Eric by email, eric@pleinairmagazine.com. Be sure to pick up our free ebook, 240 plein air painting tips by some of America's top painters. It's free at pleinairtips.com. Tune in next week for more great interviews. Thanks for listening.